Hello, everybody. Once again, it is Orvalachan, Less Than Guru, and I was uh, going to pick up from my last discussion video about old school versus new school. And last time I focused kind of on the more old school mentality of combat as battle and the new school mentality as combat as sport. Now, of course, everybody has different opinions and everybody has different things that have happened to them in games and might think things a little, differently, different. But that's kind of how it does. Old school mentality was kind of more of the you don't know what you're getting into in any battle situation. New school is more, and here's Mars again because I'm talking. What it looks like not even a minute, and he already heard me talking and wants to be part of the video. So new school is more of a challenging but fair fight type mentality. And of course, any group and anybody, any game master can use one or the other in one or the other systems. But last video, I was trying to explain the mentality behind it and why old school kinds of goes one way and new school kind of goes the other way. There's always the instances where you have bad game masters or the game master and the party haven't had a session 0 where the game master changes it in the partway through a campaign, so there's misunderstandings and stuff like that. That's why I always suggest do a session 0, get everybody on board with the same way that you're going to be running the campaign, and then there's less misunderstandings, less hard feelings if players don't understand what the game master is going for, or the game master knows what he's going for but hasn't communicated it well enough to the players, so therefore they're doing things that he's not expecting. They're just charging into battle and he's like, I told you it was a dragon, but he had not conveyed the information that yes, this campaign that I'm doing is going to be a combat as battle. So for part 2, I wanted to do kind of a it's really linked with that as combat as sport versus battle, and that is campaign styles. Old school campaign styles and the original granddaddy of them all, role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, were dungeon crawls. They very seldom had wilderness, actually. I remember seeing specific supplemental books at the bookstore that were specifically like how to do wilderness adventures, because the basic premise was you went into a dungeon, and depending on how big it was, it could take you many weeks, entering the dungeon, defeating some foes, taking the treasure, bringing it back out, and going back to the town to rest, and then coming and going a little bit further, going back, going in further, going back, going further, etc., etc. And that's where you kind of get the really big dungeon crawl type adventures. I'm trying to think of the big one under in Forgotten Realms, under Mountain. There's the yawning portal hole that adventurers go down, and it's just forever. And there's a big box set and second edition that came out that I actually have, and it basically didn't even provide the whole dungeon. It provided a huge amount of area of the dungeon, and then it was like it kind of keeps going on and on and on, so up to game masters to populate. And that was kind of another old school mentality where a lot of maps and adventures, they might give you just a couple of levels of a dungeon, and then anything deeper they were like game masters come up with it yourself. And that did put a lot of pros and cons. It put a lot of pressure or work. If you like it, it's not necessarily pressure, but it was the game master had to come up with things to put into the game. So that was kind of a con. A pro of it would be, though, that the game master could tailor make it however he wanted to, and there's always a thing where players being curious and sometimes also being game masters and running different games, if not with the same group, they might have that supplement, and they might now you just easy to buy it off of drive-through RPG or things like that, get the PDF. It's easy for players to have access to that information. And while we would like to think that our players are mature or adult enough not to go looking in the book to find out all the secrets, we all know that that's good in theory, but in practice, there's always those players that need to know or feel that they need to know every detail about any monster, adventure, etc., and use that information to beat the game. So whereas you have bad game masters, you sometimes have, or at least bad behavior, game master behavior, there's also that bad player behavior as well. So you had that type of thing. So can be a pro if the game master has to come up with things himself, because then the players aren't necessarily going to understand what's going on. Things are going to be new and exciting, and you won't necessarily have things going on like that. So campaign styles, the old school was kind of those dungeon crawls that you spent the time, you went in, you got your stuff, you came back, you healed up, you did that, and you would go back in. Gradually, as time went on, then that expanded into wildernesses and stuff like that, and game masters would come up with plot arcs. And in my opinion, it's those game masters coming up with those plot arcs, and a few D&D type adventures where you did have linked modules. It wasn't really everything that they did, but there were a few. I believe Against the Giants was one. I never personally went through it, but I read that you had to do different types of giants, and then it went off that way. Or even like Warhammer Enemy Within was kind of a plot arc, but they weren't very common. They were more the exception and not the rule. The rule was kind of like, here's your one adventure module, and it's designed for characters this level to this level, and it was kind of self-contained in that aspect. And a lot of times game companies would try to make it kind of generic enough that it could be put into any world. I've seen kind of problems with some of that. They say, oh, we're generic and this can be included in any world, but then you see specific type lakes. Sometimes they even name them, specific city layouts, river flows next to cities, and as a game master, you gotta go, do I even have anything in my own world, geography-wise, that fits all of those things, or you might have to change it. And again, I'm all for changing anything and everything to fit the game that you and your group want to play. But that was kind of the old school mentality, where those plot arcs were kind of a little more sandboxy. Now the newer things that I see out there a lot, especially with at least I'm not very familiar with 5th edition D&D, but 4th edition D&D really had this pretty much the same thing in theme as Pathfinder Adventure Paths, where you started off at level 1, and you might get to say level 4 or 5, and then you go to the next book, and that might get you to like around 8, and then the next one get you to 10, 11, etc., and you can go through the whole thing. 4th edition had one that each 10 levels, because 4th edition had 30 levels, had 3 books, and so there was 9 books total. Pathfinder has a lot. I think they're usually around six books for the adventure path. And kind of how I hit on the first video with the different styles of combat, I really think the combat of sport fits better with these adventure paths, for the simple fact that it is nice to be able to take a character from start to finish on this overarching plot. Usually, you start off in a little town finding some little problem, and then as you go on, you realize that the problem is much worse, and your characters gain levels, they gain power, items, etc. And they started off, barely able to get past that first little adventure, that first little problem, and then now they're doing something world, saving save the world type thing. And it has a nice beginning and end to those adventure paths and modules. I'll just call them adventure paths because I kind of like that name. As I said before, I personally don't like Pathfinder's first edition. I haven't had the time to look at second edition, but first edition, it's not a system for me. Same thing with the D&D 3 point X. Just certain things are getting when I get into actual reviews. I'll explain that. But it's still the adventure pass I really like, and I've stated that before. The reason that I played a previous adventure path was my first Pathfinder game. When I found out I didn't like Pathfinder as a system, but I really enjoyed the path, and that's what kept me through the whole 3-year adventure paths. Again, it might seem really long. Oh my God, 3 years on an adventure path, but we play usually around 3 hours every other Sunday, with holidays and vacations and stuff like that, kind of disrupting what might go on. So it was a serious investment of time, but I really liked the paths. And if that was a combat as battle, where some of those things would have been just so much bigger than our characters, we would still be on it. We would probably have a lot of character deaths in that time if we were trying to rush to the end. And because of that, there's a point where your character-wise, you might just lose meaning. Like I'll say, and hopefully this doesn't spoil anything because adventure paths and stuff out there, but I'm going to talk about the adventure paths I did before was Iron Gods, and I'm currently in Strange Eons. And in both of those, there is a point where if the party becomes a TPK, or if you lose a bunch of characters, when you first did that little adventure, either in the Asylum, in the beginning of Strange Eons, or if you were, I believe, whatever the small, something Spire, maybe it's not Spire, but there was a small little town that you started off in Iron Gods, and if you had not been there as a character, if your character had not been there and had not a personal attachment to the bad things that were going on, you might not care to continue. And so your game master, or you as a game master, has 6 books, and you got through the first one, and say enough people have died because they're rushing in, or you're playing combat as battle, so they're having to go off and do other things to try to level, or to get their characters' stats up, and etc. Then they might lose that investment that they have. And there is all the negative connotation about railroading, where, and hopefully if you're watching this, you know what railroading is. It's basically where the dungeon master has a set path that the characters are going to go on, and that's the path, and there's nothing to get them off the path. And if they take a left turn and the game master wants them to go right, then they have all types of weird, crazy stuff happen to the party. I've experienced a few of those. One of them, one of my friends, he's learned as a game master, but his first campaign that he started was really bad railroad, and it got to the point where we as players were kind of fighting him as a game master. Like, we wanted this wagon, and for whatever reason he didn't want us to get a wagon, because we wanted to put our supplies in it, etc. He really didn't want us to get this wagon, and we did everything in our power to get past whatever blocks. Big tree fell in the middle of the road. Okay, we're going to take the day to haul it off, chop it up, haul it off. We get to a river. We get pitch and tar and it's waterproof and float it down the river like a boat, etc. It's just stupid, ridiculous. What that goes into the discussion, though, is these adventure paths type modules can have kind of a railroady feel, because there is a set certain here to here, here to here. And I'm not saying it's bad in these cases with like the adventure paths, or even with mega adventures, which are one book, but they can span up to usually around 7 acts, and like Torg Eternity, such as Relics of Power, or original Torg Relics of Power was 3 modules that, even though it's not a level-based system, it kind of got you from point A to point B with a world-changing event. So you do have those type of things, which might not be exactly railroady, because there's that you might be able to solve different problems along the way differently, but overall they kind of are, because here's A and here's B. Whereas a open sandbox is just, here's the world, players, you tell me what you're going to do. Usually, hopefully, please tell me before the next adventure, and then from this session to the next session, I can figure out what's going on. Or as a game master, if you have time, you can plot out the world, and you can actually go, okay, up, like I said, up here is a dragon, down here are some, gnolls, over here or some goblins, and you just populate it, and you already kind of have what's kind of going on, and the players just take their characters to those areas. But that's kind of the campaign spanning. And I think that the combat as sport with the open world type old school thing just wouldn't work as well with the combat as battle old school, because then you just go wherever you want to. And I mean, even on the adventure paths, you can't skip from the very first one to the end. Usually, you don't understand what's going on. You have to investigate and pick up clues and defeat villains and find out what their plans were. Realize that it went a step higher, step higher, step higher. But you just have to kind of figure out, if I'm doing an open sandbox campaign, and it's a whole world or a whole region. You can. I've even taken a map of either, the world or the United States, or a couple of states together. I live in Missouri. Once I cut out had a state map, and I overlaid the region of the world that I was game mastering the thing over. So it was kind of like, what is 100 miles? Well, if you go from, this city to this city, across the highway, that's 100 miles. If you have a road, you can kind of overlay it and go, okay, from this town to this town, but you're not driving cars, you're walking or riding horses and things like that. And it kind of can give players a little more idea of what's going on, how big that world really is, using real world examples. So I'm not saying either one's bad, because I love open sandbox. The campaign I'm planning now is going to be pretty much open sandbox. But I really like those adventure paths. I like exploring those plot lines and figuring out what's going on. Like I said, that's what kept me going 3 years in a game system I didn't like, but it also made me decide to go again. I wasn't, but the game master changed up something, and with the strange aeons, the way that I understand it, it happens is your characters have amnesia. And our game master, and I'm not sure if this is part of the actual game or not, he made our characters for us. So when we started, we just didn't have amnesia as characters. We had kind of amnesia as players, and it was like, here's your character, and we figured out skills and stuff kind of as we had to. He made up the character sheet, but we were prisoners, and we escaped, and we defeated the first little thing that had our stuff, and there was a big pile of stuff, and we had to go through it and kind of look around and go, I think that might be mine. It kind of fits my character, but this other thing, like, we had no characters whatsoever in the game that were any type of gunslinger firearm class, but there was a flintlock pistol. So we didn't know who that went to. So somebody was like, hey, can I have it? And there's probably some equipment that the game master is like, okay, here's your equipment, but didn't tell us, that got split up differently. But that little thing of me not knowing what my character was going to be actually got me to play that game. I was very seriously considered not playing it because I didn't like Pathfinder, even though I liked the Pathfinder path that we went on. But the previous adventure, towards the end, we had a new character came in, and they came in at the same level as everybody else did, and that kind of, you can optimize those characters a lot better than if you've had to make those decisions incremental. When you have, boom, you're level 15, or in Tor, boom, you have 100 experience. You can really min max those characters. You can do it, and it became a watch the new character solve all the problems game. I like the idea that nobody knew the characters, so you could get and the game master did a pretty good job of divvying up characters. A couple people might not have been too thrilled. I didn't understand my character, but after reading, buying one of the Pathfinder books that character class was in, and reading up on it, I was able to kind of get mentally invested into the character. But to me, that was kind of a cool thing. So you have this plot arc, um, that you start here, and we're going to end up somewhere down here in 3 years' time. But the mentality of it was sandbox. We didn't have backstories. The game master knows our backstories, but we as players don't know our characters' backstories. And I always think that's an interesting thing. So combat, or old school versus new school type thing. This kind of bleeds across the thing, across the spectrum, old school, new school. But one of the things I always found interesting and could be really, really good or really, really bad was character backstories in a campaign. If you have players that really like to get involved in their backstory, something like that, Strange Aeons, at least my game master is doing, would not probably be well liked if certain players didn't have a hand in what their actual backstory was. I think it's wonderful. I'm a person as a game master and as a player that I like having a minimum amount of backstory knowledge, so that way it can, my character does have a backstory, but I don't like writing even a 1-page background, because I want things to happen in the game. I think that's what is important to me. But I also like the game master to be able to say, hey, the guy in the bar there, you know him from your past. You said you were a farmer, because I kind of like loose background, like, oh, I was a farmer before I became an adventurer, or something like that. And that way the game master can pull in stuff. It's kind of like in Torg Eternity, you have connection cards, and it's, hey, you know that guy. And sometimes those connection cards. I like the old Torg. You could make a subplot permanent. And so we came up with things like one of the Realm Runner in the group. He is like BFF in high school was like a Louisiana police officer. So whenever they went into that area, boom, they had a permanent connection. And it was something that happened in game, but it was part of the backstory. And I really enjoy things like that. But some people like big long. They like writing their 5-page through their 20-page backstories. And that can be good also, because then the game master knows what that player wants to see in the game. But I think that the player and game master really need to work on those. If you have a long backstories, they really need to work together, because does the player really, oh, I'm the lost son of a king. Okay, now is that going to disrupt you to the rest of the party, because now you're a prince or a lost prince, and they're just peasants? Or you write up a bunch of people, and the game master's like, no, these people don't exist. So there's that conflict that you kind of need to avoid. Also, the more devoted or invested you get into that character, into that backstory, if you are doing the old school system and that character dies because the combat is battle, then that player is like, all that potential of that 20-page backstory is dead and over and ended. So you have to think of what those ramifications and consequences might be. So if your game master is like, okay, we are having a battle as war, or combat as battle, sorry, combat as battle game, and your players come up with 20-page backstories, you really need to get with them and kind of like figure out, hey, this is how it's going to be. If you write a 20-page backstory, that's wonderful, but if your character, then you need to make sure your character is being smart. Because just because you have a 20-page backstory doesn't mean that I'm going to keep your character alive. If your character does something stupid, then they're going to end up dead, and then that 20-page backstory means absolutely nothing. And as a game master, enforce the fact that no, their next character is not going to be the brother or the son or whatever of the previous dead character cousin. That backstory is over and finished. It's like in Torg and Torg Eternity. I don't like the idea of a player dying or playing a martyr card and coming back as a carbon copy of that character at the same level of experience and being everything that character was plus some. And I also don't necessarily like having players, when characters die, all of a sudden that stuff's up for grabs. Now perks, yes, it wouldn't be up for grabs, but mundane equipment, you have to think, are you really going to loot your Storm Knight friend's body? You know, a few items here and there that might have been grouped, or, you know, lent out to him, sure, but like if he had a trusty sword, you know, that something that might be buried with him and in honor and stuff like that. So you have to really try to figure out how things and taboos and stuff like that work in your game. So it's kind of it's getting on 30 minutes, and the campaign styles with the old school and new school kind of really do fit in with that combat as battle versus combat as sport. So I'll keep this one shorter. Next time I do want to do leveling, different aspects of gaining XP and advancing your character. So the main thing I want to say, the two kind of campaign styles that I see, and campaign styles, old school games could do those arcs. There were those arcs. It was just rare. New school stuff, you can have open world. When I did Torg, which I consider Torg, the original Torg, more of a middle ground. It wasn't necessarily old school, it wasn't necessarily new school, but a lot of the mechanics and stuff like that were very, and thoughts were very new school-y. But games like that, I didn't have any adventures past the Relics of Power for a long time. They just weren't available to me. And so I had an open sandbox. It was a, you go here, players, what are you doing? Where are you wanting to go? Which High Lord are you wanting to go against? Etc. Very, very sandboxy, with more a leaning towards new school feel. So you can do that. You can have those old school games with the new school plot arc type things, and you can have the new school with the open sandbox, or even the dungeon delves, where you just go in and you come back. You know, you go in, defeat the monster, take the stuff, bring it back. Go a little bit further, beat the monster, bring it back, etc. There is a lot of at least I've seen. I haven't like looked into it, meaning reading it, but I've seen advertisements and stuff. There are adventures like that, like the Tomb of Horrors has been updated in various editions and stuff. So you can't have those type of things. You just have to go into it with the understanding this is an old school mentality. If you come in with a new school mentality, you're going to be confused. You're going to look at a lot of things and like, this is stupid. This doesn't work. But watch my video about the different combats and watch other things. There's really good, there's lots of content on YouTube, of course, and much better production values, probably a lot smarter people than me. I am less than guru. but we all have different ways of bringing it. Sometimes hearing it from one person might not click. Hearing it from a different person makes it click, and then you can go back, or you can think back and go, oh, okay, that's what that person was saying. So that's one of the primary reasons why I have this YouTube channel. I'm not expecting to earn any type of living off of it whatsoever. It's not even a tiny little hope. It's just I want to express my opinions in the way that I think of things, and maybe that'll help you. You know, if you look off on those other channels there, and it'll help you like grab what they're saying and go, oh, okay, like that. So again, I want to thank you. I appreciate your time spent watching my videos, whether they are these discussion videos, whether they are my playthroughs or my tutorials on how to set up games in Roll20. I am seriously thinking about recording my new game that I'll be doing at some point. Probably be after the new year, 2021. But I am thinking about maybe recording those and setting up so you can kind of see how an old school style campaign might progress and be interesting, because I would say most of my players in that system they started back old school, late 80s, early 90s, but we've been doing so much new school stuff now. I wonder how much of that old school mentality has kind of gone away and how much they're going to have to adjust, so that might be interesting as well. So I'll say what apparently all YouTubers must say is, if you like it, you can click the like. If you dislike it, you can click the dislike. Thank you to my 12 subscribers. If you want to subscribe and get this video or future videos to pop up on your list, that would be cool. I love looking and saying, oh yeah, I got 4 views. That's 4 more than I thought. So that's pretty cool. Hopefully, if you have anything you would like to say or discuss or questions, you can leave comments and stuff. I'm open and available for discussion. So once again, I am Lehman Crafton, Zorvalachan, Less Than Guru.